businesses, business owners want to be profitable, right? You're into the business and you want to be profitable.
Well, you heard it here first. Businesses want to be profitable. I'm not Mr. Obvious, I'm Bunker Bob, and this is Straight Talk. It's time for the Bunker Bob Show. Yes, that's right. Mr. Obvious of McClendon Chisholm, that of course would be Mark Kipphut, the chairman of the Economic Development Committee. I'm just going to call it the Kipot Committee because that's basically what it is. If you had the chance to watch the broadcast that I put up, a lot of you did. It's still it will stay on my website so you can watch the entire thing. But I warn you right now, you will never get that one and a half hours of your life back. So I'm warning you before you watch it. But if you did, you would see and you would understand why I say it's the Kipot Committee. It's not an economic development committee, but the committee led by an individual with, in my opinion, and based upon the evidence that I'm going to present, this is someone with a real desire for a power grab, and that I think is fairly obvious. And so that's why when I was there, it was everything I could do not to scream. It was one of the most excruciating experiences of my life, frankly. And if you watched it, I think you would better understand what I mean by that. I want to just basically go through some of the clips of that meeting so that you can see for yourself what I'm talking about. And we'll start with basically the committee structure. This is a committee that has been together for over a year. It was established a year ago. And Mr. Kipphut and Mr. Mike Donegan, who did not attend the meeting, I might add, these guys were going to lead this thing down the primrose path for the city of McClendon Chisholm. And what ends up happening is absolutely nothing. 4 total meetings in the last year, and only one member of that committee made any presentation. And that, of course, is Melody Osorio. She attended a meeting by herself. Well, she and another member were the only ones present. Mr. Kipphut, Mr. Donegan, Bloom, no one else was there. And so she gave the presentation, her recommendations, her thoughts, a place to start, and some structure on how they should move forward. And so she presented all this stuff to one person. And Mr. Kipphut and Mr. Donegan have never given her the time of day as it relates to that, as far as I know. What's more, in this meeting, you will not hear them discuss anything Mrs. Osorio had presented. So her presentation was not just not heard, it was just completely and totally ignored because Mr. Kipphut had his own presentation to give. So I think that's where we start.
And I think that's where we were on track to do that last year, and then when the panel kind of just got sidetracked, but we were doing some of that. Melanie had done a terrific job of providing a lot of that information. So I think that's, we're keen to want to do that. That's why we talked about kind of setting up a structure. What are the things we need to do first? Because you can't do some of the other things until you knock out some of the top ones. And so that's what we were kind of trying to focus on. We had created our, the vision statement. We had created some goals and objectives, and we were like, okay, what are the things that we need to do first? And we never really kind of fulfilled any of that. And, it's great to talk about what we want to do, but unless we set up the right structure, we're never going to be able to do it.
Right. Give me a task and I will do it.
Well, that's like, and so in that paper, there's a specific structure of setting this committee up, creating subcommittees. The subcommittees, right, have two specific tasks. One is the vision, land use, right, or zoning that goes with that, the other.
I'm sorry. Is he done? I've got a treat for you at the end of this show. I'm going to conclude. I opened the show with Mark Kipphut. I'm going to conclude the show with Mark Kipphut. I've taken the highlights from that meeting, and it will help you better understand why he is truly the Captain Obvious of McClendon Chisholm. The platitudes ad nauseum. Where he tries to sound grandiose and thoughtful and as though he understands what he's doing. This is a guy who doesn't know anything about economic development, nothing, has zero experience in economic development, but he believes himself to be all-knowing. I tell you, anyone who has sat with him and will say the same thing. Mr. Kipphut is the smartest man in the room, and the reason why, if there's any question about it, the reason why is because he'll tell you so. You don't realize how stupid you are until you sit down and talk to him, because he'll show you how stupid you are. So here it is. The Economic Development Advisory Panel will advise City Council on strategies and actions to broaden and diversify the tax base through appropriate commercial and land development consistent with the historic nature and character of McClendon Chisholm, in collaboration with the City Council, Planning and Zoning Commission, and the City Planner to guide the comprehensive plan. Boy, doesn't that sound exciting? I just get goosebumps every time I think about that. What was also interesting is he also presented and handed out the history of McClendon Chisholm as he sees it. You see, this is what leftists do. If you don't like your history, you just make it up. And so and I'm waiting for a copy of it. And so hopefully I'll get that soon, but we'll see the history of McClendon Chisholm according to Mark Kipphut. So here is the next portion of that, of this presentation. These are the priorities. Define who we are as a city and a people. Define what MC means in order to determine our economic development vision and help develop our engagement strategy. Understand the upcoming changes, like the Highway 205 expansion, other road expansions like Highway 550, the future loop, economic development plans within the cities, and ETJ surrounding McClendon Chisholm. What about determining the areas? These are the goals and priorities. Determine the areas within the city of McClendon Chisholm the citizens desire economic development and growth to take place based on the changes that will happen in and around the city, based on citizen input. How are they going to get the input? That'll be interesting. Based on the best practices and standards of advisors. Well, I'm curious who that's going to be. And finally, this is the last page. Use the economic vision plan changes in and around MC and identified locations for economic development with MC findings to develop the next MC comprehensive building plan strategy. The MC City Council will utilize this nonsense. Okay, yada, yada. All right. I think we've basically seen enough, and we understand what's happening there. So with that said, let's move on. And so this is basically who Mr. Kipphut, when he talks about members, there's something interesting about this. So watch this, and I'll explain.
Right now we have membership. Some of us have been, I think, approved by city council by vote. Others I don't think have. So it's just useful to go back. I'd like to have city council, thumbprint on it.
You want to revisit that resolution that established the committee?
Yeah, exactly. That would be one of the actions.
What's interesting is those sitting around the table. There are basically Melody Osario, Jim Herron, and Mark Kipphut are appointed members. These are people that were approved by the city council. Jim Bloom, who is the mayor pro tem, who is supposed to be the member of the city council. They actually had two. Jim Herron was a city council member. when he was on the committee. On the committee. So you had 2 members of city council on it. Now there are 2 other members, Tommy Baugh and Daniel Tucker. And both of them are on the Planning and Zoning Commission. Neither of them are a part of the committee. You have 2 people who are not part of the committee that are in attendance, that are sitting at the table, but you also have 2 citizens that are present as well. One of them happens to be yours truly, and the other one happens to be Valerie Bodart. Now, Mrs. Bodart, if you didn't know, Ms. Bodart attends most of the city council meetings. If you're not familiar with Ms. Bodart, she is very active in our city, and when the mayor put out a call to citizens saying, hey, we have a vacancy on city council. Anyone who would be interested in this, please let us know. Submit your name. She was one of the 4 people who submitted their names. And when city council decided to replace or make the appointment, they didn't choose anyone who contacted the mayor and city hall, saying that they would be interested. And in fact, they chose someone who resigned from office as mayor, which put me in office as mayor. And in doing so, they didn't send any email, any letter, any phone call. And understand, a few of those people, I think maybe even all 4 of them, were at the meeting where that appointment was taking place. And the mayor and city council members didn't even give them the time of day, didn't even say, hey, sorry about that. They were not nominated. They were not discussed. No discussion whatsoever was made when Nathan Hodges, the former corrupt mayor of McClendon-Chisholm. When I use the word corrupt, I mean that he violated the Texas Open Meetings Act. He went behind my back I did a whole show on this. Just look for Goodbye Larkin, Hello Hodges. So go back and watch that show. You'll get more information. But Valerie Bodart was one of those people. It wasn't until I did a show on it, then several days later, Ms. Bodart received a formal letter in the mail from the mayor saying, I'm sorry, we've chosen someone else. So just to give you a little insight, Ms. Bodart is not an outspoken person. She doesn't yell. She doesn't scream. She's not like some of the people that you've seen at city council meeting. She doesn't foam at the mouth. She's very quiet. She's very introspective. She's somewhat of an intellectual. So she's really taking a lot of things in. I think it'd be amazing to have someone like her who is so courteous, so kind, and so interested in what's going on in our city to actually be on city council or mayor. But of course, they've got to put their political hacks on the council like Mr. Hodges. And so that's exactly what they did. I digress. Let's move on and let's focus on what I think is the real issue, and that is Mr. Kiphut's grand vision for our city. So let's watch.
So one of the actions I'd like to see us come out of here, we don't have to do this tonight specifically unless we want to, is come forward with a specific recommendation as a body on structure and what those procedures will be, and then how it should be appropriately captured in city ordinance and code. And I look to Lisa for that, but I mean, do you have an ordinance to establish it? I mean, that's a question.
Establish this committee or something?
Yeah, for this.
I mean, we do it for
You want to make it more of a permanent committee rather than one.
Well, I think if it's, because that way my opinion is if it's a permanent committee, it has body and has importance. And
I think that what's important here is that you hear Mr. Kipphut, and unfortunately the video got pushed over onto the slide, but you heard what was being said, and Mr. Kipphut thinks this needs to be a permanent committee. He wants to basically have control, but it doesn't stop there. Those he wants to see on the committee are also very important. And watch this.
I would like to see the chair of the PNZ sit on this body as just
Yeah, so that we're not.
So exactly. So there's complete involvement.
I didn't understand that until until I reached out to Adrian Bogman. I said, do you have any idea why he wants the P&Z chair on the committee? And Adrian said, well, something tells me it has to do with the fact that he's Mark Kippot's neighbor. I think that's probably pretty accurate. Mark Kipphut loves him, some people who loves to pucker up and smooch hard on his hind quarters. And that's what he's going to do. He's going to fill his committee up with the people that he wants to be on the committee so that he can reign supreme. I mean, who's going to argue with Mark Kipphut? I don't know of anyone. If he's brought you on the committee and he's a friend of yours and you trust him, right? But what's more interesting is, who does he not want to see on the committee? This is the most telling part of all.
Or is there ever a danger of having too much of the P&Z involved in this committee?
Well, I'm nervous about that, and I'm nervous about too much council involved in this committee. So I think I've expressed all those.
Yeah, and I just, I mean, I don't intend to be actively involved in this. I mean, this.
Well, I think, yeah.
I mean, on a meeting by meeting basis, it certainly mean maybe sitting in, but not as a.
Well, and you'll see. I mean, and again, my idea is only not, and certainly not the end state answer. Just a point of discussion, starting point for discussion would be to have a city council member be a liaison to this committee.
Correct.
Planning and zoning chair on this committee, and then the committee itself, we structure and organize.
Yeah, so no elected officials on there. Remember, this is an economic development committee. It is an advisory. It's a position of advice. It offers advice. It offers recommendations. But Mr. Kipphut wants it to be more than that. Of course, he wants an ordinance establishing the committee so that it's an official committee. Folks, come on. Seriously? Yeah. What's also interesting about his grand plan is the fact that he wants to see subcommittees. Well, who would run the subcommittees? Well, obviously the chairman of the committee. By the way, what is his vision? What does he think? What kind of businesses does Mr. Kipphut want to see in McClendon Chisholm? I think we deserve to know, right? I think so. Let's hear.
I was against Dollar General, but thinking more about it, certainly we're not against the concept of having a small grocery store here. I don't think.
Right.
So
Conceptually.
I mean, I think about Dollar General as I think about Walmart or neighborhood Walmart or, as large big box stores, right? Big national organizations. I mean, but you see what's happening up in Heath with Tom Thumb.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the vision. Walmart neighborhood stores, good. This is what we want. We want a grocery store. Really? Do we? No, I guess Mr. Kipphut has failed to pay attention to the city surveys. That's right. He doesn't like the city surveys. We'll talk about that in a minute. So let's keep moving on. One of the committee members, Daniel Tucker, is on the Planning and Zoning Commission. He came up to me after the meeting, and we had a fairly, I'll just say, a spirited conversation. And as a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, I mean, basically he came up and said, "I watch your show with a grain of salt." And I told him, I said, that's really too bad, because his point was that everyone has a difference of opinion, and everyone has a different perspective on the things that you present. And I said, absolutely, but I focus on the fact that I'm the only individual, the only person presenting ideas that is actually basing it on empirical evidence. I'm showing you the facts, and that didn't seem to persuade Mr. Tucker at all. I'm 50 years old, and in my 50 years, I've never met anyone who is objective. I think it is an impossibility. I think it's impossible for someone to be objective. We all have bias. We all see the world certain ways. And I respect the fact that other people have differing opinions. Interestingly enough, Jim Bloom and I had a short conversation afterwards, which was incredibly cordial. I told Jim Bloom that I appreciated the way he stood up for citizens at a city council meeting where developers had come in from Triple Creek trying to put in trying to modify the development agreement so that they could actually start building this massive home development. And the guy who was there said, "I know this is a hard decision for you." Jim Bloom was the only member of the city council, the only one to speak up against what they were proposing. And what Jim said was, "It's not a hard decision for me at all. This is not what our city wants. We want to protect our 1.5 acre minimum per home site standard." Jim Bloom is also, he has a history of standing on the conviction of his belief. And for that, I respect Mr. Bloom. And we talked and we said, maybe we should just get together sometime. He reminded me, he said, we may not agree on everything. And I reminded him, I'm okay with people disagreeing. I don't have a problem with people disagreeing with me. I have a problem with people lying. You have a difference of opinion. That's great. Okay, that's fine. But just don't lie about it. And so that I go back to Mr. Tucker. And Mr. Tucker presents himself and he said, I try to look at everything objectively. I try to just weigh everything. And I don't believe that for a second. I know you're watching, Mr. Tucker. I don't believe that for a second. Not a second. You said you voted for Scott Turnbull. Really? Well, did you put a Scott Turnbull sign in your yard? Heavens no. No, you did not. So don't tell me that you voted for Scott Turnbull. I'm glad for you, Mr. Tucker, to contact me anytime. As I told you when we met, if you disagree with something that I say, if I say something that is factually inaccurate, which by the way, Scott Turnbull today, just a few hours before this show, called me and said, you said something inaccurate. I watched your show. He's been in Cancun, by the way, and no, he does not have a bathing suit photo. That I can use for blackmail. But he basically called me and he said you were inaccurate and you called it a Dollar Tree or dollar. I forget which one it is, Dollar General or Dollar Tree. But I called it the wrong thing in a show while he was gone. See, I don't mind people telling me I'm inaccurate on things. But if you have a difference of opinion, fine. Then give me some quantitative, give me some empirical evidence to demonstrate it. I think the biggest problem that I have, respectfully, Mr. Tucker, and I told Mr. Tucker this, I told him, is what he said during the meeting. And here it is.
Coming from California, there was a town that was a couple miles away from us, and over in San Marcos where they had Restaurant Row. And they just had a number of various restaurants, and they were centered within a certain area there, and very, very successful. Few people went from everywhere, and just very, very popular. But it was thought out and planned, and ultimately it was a destination place during the daytime for business people, and at night for people who want to recreate and do other things.
Right.
So something along those lines could be very successful in conjunction. I'm thinking that in conjunction with your park outlay, with a lot of lighting, maybe a small amphitheater, things of that sort. I mean, we can go beyond Dollar General, we go beyond.
Yeah, the thing that drives a native Texan like me crazy is when a Californian comes in and says, hey, we love Texas. We love your low tax rate. We're here because we want to soak it up. And then come and tell me, hey, here's how we do things in California. That drives me absolutely crazy. The Pennsylvania liberal Mark Kipphut is someone who drives me crazy because everything they have to offer is not something that emphasizes and amplifies the values of Texas, which makes our state great. It basically bastardizes what we're doing. instead of enriching what we hope to preserve, which is our wide open spaces and more rural lifestyle here in McClendon-Chisholm. Jim Bloom asked a great question, brought up a great point during this meeting, and I have an answer for him. I'll tell him my opinion, but of course I wasn't at the table, so I couldn't share it. So I'll let you listen for yourself.
Just made me think of as well as how big is economic development for this town. How much offset do we want? We want low taxes, we know that. We want some services. Are we good with what we have for forever? And we'll just keep keep the rooftops low and that kind of thing? Or do we want to offset some of those costs with economic development? And there's pluses and minuses to both, but it depends what the vision for the city, and that's the bigger picture of what we are 20 years from now. A bedroom community to Rockwall, or our own self-sufficient little town that has a lot of those services for themselves. One thing we've all heard loud and clear from people here is that we do want to have that small town feel, and actually other towns around us building up and cramming in houses and all that could make what we do here even more attractive to them. It's the closest place you can go and get that feeling.
Yeah, to get away from your life.
Yeah, and like you said, people come in, spend their money, and they go home.
Just like we do in Rockwall.
Right.
We go to them, give them our tax dollars.
That's
and they come
exactly
home.
right. Yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry that the video didn't show on that one either, but the question is, what kind of community do we want to be? My opinion is that, as Jim Bloom highlighted, that if we can preserve our wide open spaces, if we can preserve our 1.5 acre minimum per home site standard, which has never changed in our community. So we haven't reduced it just because for Sonoma Verde and Triple Creek. That ordinance has always been in place. That was a compromise. That was something that the mayor, Mike Donegan, back then, when they signed those agreements, that's something that he worked out with the developer. Little shady business that Mike Donegan did back then. And what Jim Bloom says is absolutely true. If we can prevent Triple Creek from moving forward, and I believe we can, with people like Jim Bloom, frankly, if we can prevent that monstrosity of a development, remember, Sonoma Verde is 1,100 homes on 509 acres, and the Triple Creek development is going to be 1,876 homes on less than 500 acres total. There's 1,676 total acres, but most of that is in a floodplain. So the only thing that can be built on is about 500, less than 500 acres, 1,876 homes, almost twice the size of Sonoma Verde on a smaller footprint. And so we've got to do everything we can to stop that development from happening. And if we can do that, then think about the value of all of our homes. Think of those of you who live in Sonoma Verde. Goodness gracious, what have I said? I did, as mayor, I did 2 State of the City addresses, and I talked about it both times. I focused on the fact that we should focus on being a bedroom community, on limiting government so that we can keep our tax rate low, and we can become an oasis in the middle of all of these cities that want to be these big metropolitan areas. That is a vision that I can embrace. It's why I moved to McClendon-Chisholm. Oh, by the way, and a lot of other people did too, and I can prove it. I can prove it. How can I prove it? With a survey. Oh, did someone say survey? I think so. I think somebody's talking survey, and I think it's people on the Economic Development Committee.
In citizen engagement.
Right.
Right. Whether it's a survey, whether it's town hall, whether it's both, right? All of those ways you get feedback from the citizens and get feedback from council. Right. Right. And then, because I know planning and zoning, I think, struggles with the same sort of issue sometimes is, what's the desires.
What's the
right?
desire?
You rely on the citizens to come tell you.
And you need I always kind of would like to have a broader view of what the citizens want other than the one or two they show up.
Right.
Well, you have the past survey that was done in 1819 that I requested this the other day, and 215 pages though, that was pretty large. And so that might be a start point for us to get a conception of what the citizens want, and then beyond that we can supplement that with other surveys if we want to be more
like an economic survey.
Right.
But that might be a little bit of a start point. Though, from the responses that I saw, they were very limiting in terms of the number that people actually went online. As an example, there were 1,000 people that went online, but the number that actually finished off the survey was very small. So there's a little bit of bias there that I was, I had to put in reserve.
And I think we can, just with good survey design and short, quick bits that really hit
very
what
clear, concise, detailed,
Right.
and this yes or no, yes or no, yes or no kind of thing. I've done surveys in the past, and you can ask these nebulous questions and get nebulous responses, and it
It's not
doesn't lead you anywhere.
Okay. They're talking survey. What do they want to do with a survey? How exactly is that going to work for them? I think that's a fair question to ask because they're making a lot of criticism about the past surveys. We did a survey. You just watched show 3 that I've done. This was the last survey. 3 surveys the city has done. I did the first 2. The first one was in 2016-17. What kind of nebulous questions are you referring to, Mr. Tucker, that are biased? And what kind of questions are you planning to ask? The questions that are asked in this survey, which, by the way, you will not be able to find any of the surveys on the city website. Do you know why? Because Lorna Kipphut doesn't like surveys. She thinks that they're silly. I told Daniel Tucker, I said, I present empirical evidence. I don't talk out of my hind end. And his point is, well, everyone else doesn't talk out of their hind end. Oh, yes, they do. Yes, they do. And I'll show you. I'll prove it. But this city survey, we asked, why did you choose McLennan Chisholm? What do you want to see business in McLennan Chisholm? And if so, what kind? What kind do you not want to see in McLennan Chisholm? These are some fundamental baseline questions that this committee is now sitting here going, hey, these are the kind of questions that we need to know. We need to ask. Every one of the questions that this committee came up with that they thought we need to know have already been asked. But you can't find them on the city website. Why? Because Lorna Kipphut and Mark Kipphut are leftists. They like to reinvent history. Oh, Mr. Tucker, do you want to debate me on that? I'd love to hear how you would respond to that. I'd love to hear that. These surveys, by the way, were people responded well to this. The incredibly high response rate. Oh, that's right. You can't read it. It's no longer on the city website. So I said I would prove that Mr. and Mrs. Kipphut are going to did everything they could to stop city surveys. And here's one. This is the visual storyteller Mark Kipphut. Boy, does he tell stories! I got to admit, he's a storyteller, all right. Here's what he writes on Facebook. The council split 2-2 to approve the city survey. A, B. He's referring to Adrian Balcom was her usual nasty self and criticizing any citizen who dares suggest that it was not valuable. Big shout out to council members Heron and Larkin who pointed out the survey was never formally approved by city council and asked it be presented and approved by council in an open session. Special meeting on 11th March to finalize the survey. Stay tuned. That solicited responses that were predictable. I found it interesting the 2 elected officials running for office voted for the survey. My guess is it touts all of their accomplishments so they can use our tax dollars to campaign. You imbecile. just so you know, a city survey is a census. It's basically a census. I kind of explain how surveys work. And it was interesting, Mr. Tucker, I think you said you've done surveys before, really. 35% of my business, I'm a fundraiser. And 35% of my business, 35% of my business is spent in doing survey research. I'm a certified statistician with the American Statistical Association. I've done survey research since I was in politics, working in politics, running political campaigns. So my experience in doing surveys and public opinion polls is, I would say, far outweighs anyone's, especially Mr. Kiphut's, especially yours, Mr. Tucker, I would argue. And the questions that were asked may seem nebulous to you, but I can assure you that if you actually read and if you actually saw the city survey, you would see for yourself that they are quite comprehensive in scope and in breadth, and that the number of people who responded and the open-ended questions that we included, with every question, there was an open-ended opportunity. With every page, there was an opportunity for people to add their open-ended comments. This is what makes the survey so valuable to the people on your committee. If you guys would just take a moment, if you would just take the time to ask Lorna Kipphut to please release the documents, put them back on the city website so that you can start actually learning about what the citizens want, not what Mark and Lorna Kipphut want. That might be helpful for you, but you've got to actually have the conviction of your beliefs. But let's not stop. Let's not stop with Mark Kipphut. Let's look at what Lorna Kipphut had to say. This is another Facebook post. I was just reviewing the city council meeting agenda for Tuesday night, another politically motivated survey. Thousands more of your dollars spent with no action taken from last year's survey. Let the new council determine how best to communicate with MC citizens behind a piece of paper. I vote May 4th. Folks, just so you know, Lorna Kipphut and the city council decided that they would take surveys off the budget. They've actually removed the ability for the city to do any more surveys, okay? Now, that's the first thing to think about, but here's what's interesting. This is another post by, yes, guess who? Lorna Kipphut. Here's what she says. If you have no intention of doing the survey, call the city and tell them not to send you a postcard. Spread the word. Jody Wright, who, by the way, is a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission, should this surprise anyone, I sent a message today requesting the 3 voters in my household not receive another copy of this sham of a survey. Okay, great, sham of the survey, but let's keep reading. And this is another person, Darlene Putman. If we opt out, is it just for this one? What if there are future ones when we do want to give feedback? Lorna says, oh, it's just for this survey. Hypocrite. Hypocrite. Do you think, as I said before, in my 50 years of life, I've never met anyone who is objective. If you actually think that Lorna and Mark Kipphut are going to present, and this committee is going to present an objective survey that's not biased, then you're irretrievably stupid. The value of surveys is not the fact that they are biased or not. In fact, the value of surveys is actually a great tool for elected bodies. This is a great tool. The Republican Party, by the way, sends out surveys all the time. Do you not like those surveys either? I guess not. But the point is, this gives members of the elected body the opportunity to put your case forward. Here's what we think. What do you think? Make an argument. Make it biased. Who cares? The great thing about it is, if you're asking questions on a survey and people have time to think about it, I don't care how you write it. I don't care how biased it is. People will give you their honest feedback. One of the questions that we asked on the second survey is, would you like to modify the 1.5 acre minimum per home site standard to 1 acre? And we gave some arguments in support of it to try to see if we could persuade citizens to bend on that. Overwhelmingly, citizens said no. The fact that you don't like Adrian Balcom the people who opposed the citizen survey, those of you who chose not to, who encouraged. And by the way, Mr. Tucker, did you encourage people to take that survey? It sounds like you thought it was biased, and you thought there was something wrong with that. If I were, if I thought a survey was biased, I would tell people and say, hey, listen, I think it's biased. I don't think that they're sharing this side of the story. And here's how I answered it, and here's how I would encourage you to answer it too. Why isn't that okay? Why aren't you fighting for that kind of thing? Oh, that's right. You're from California. There's a different mindset in Pennsylvania, a different mindset in California. And frankly, it's sickening to hear people talk now, oh, we need to do a city survey. We've done 3. Before you spend needless taxpayer dollars on your more informed, on your better prepared survey questions, why don't you first make sure that the questions haven't already been answered? Now, if you want to ask them again and say, listen, we want to see how the attitudes have changed now with more growth. Okay, I'm good with that. But how are you going to pay for it? I think that's a fair question to ask. I really do. And Jim Bloom, I know you're watching. Listen, isn't that a fair question to ask? You guys took it off the budget. And Jim, I think you're a fair-minded guy. Why don't you, if you're going to do another survey, I don't know, why don't you bring other people in the room who may see things differently than you do, that those do. And I know that you're okay with that. That's the irony of this whole thing. Jim Bloom seems to be someone who doesn't mind a disagreement. But there are other people like the Kippots who absolutely hold people hostage if you don't agree with them. There's 2 ways of seeing things, and when it comes to Mark and Lorna Kipphut, it's their way and the wrong way. So just remember that. Now, I think Lisa Paloma asked a great question, because throughout this meeting, Mark Kipphut, and I've got to tell you, it's a long meeting, and I would say 65% of the time was spent Mark Kipphut expressing his points of view. 65% of the time, easy. I'm being generous. Or excuse me, conservative. I'm being conservative when I say 65% of the time. And so the whole focus on Mark Kippot's whole focus is, how do we create this committee? How do we make it an official committee? How do we make it something that everyone will respect and that we'll have an official position? And Lisa Paloma asks, I think, one of the best questions of the night.
I'm a little concerned about the timing of it, and I think you're biting off an awful lot, and not that you can't do it, but
No.
with a comp plan, it usually takes a planner months and months, and usually.
I'm not even before we get to the comp.
Right, I realize it's just part of it, but, usually there are workshops and lots of citizen input, and it may take 6 months to even just do a comp plan. So starting with more of a strategic outlook first, before you even get that far, we're looking at, possibly, a 2-year period maybe to get all this accomplished. And my concern in the meantime is I have people that knock on the door.
Right.
And what do I do with them in the meantime? Because right now, I have a big red strip of zoning that says we
Right.
welcome general business, but it doesn't really feel that way. So, and I don't care which direction the city goes, I'll support it no matter what. But the problem is, what do you do kind of in the meantime?
What do you do in the meantime? This committee, the way it wants to go, they want to do a survey. The survey will take 4 to 6 months to prepare, to write, and to implement. Oh, but wait a minute. These guys are professionals. They know what they're doing. They can do it really quickly. They're just going to ask, they're going to make real simple questions. I will tell you this, in my experience in doing survey research, I don't know, for the last 20 years, I will tell you that if you ask simple questions, you'll get simple answers, and you will not get the kind of information that you're really looking for. Surveys are, when I do surveys, I typically do longer surveys. And while I know that there will be a dropout rate, there's a reason for that. Put the easy questions up front. And the people who are really concerned and really care about the issues, they're going to continue and they're going to stay with the survey through the end. And so it's interesting, and that's one of the processes, that's one of the measures that survey researchers that we use, is to see when the people drop out, why do they drop out? What's the what were the questions that made them drop out? Was it and we look at the amount of time they spend in answering the survey. So there's a lot of things that go into a survey, and if you want to do a survey where you're just asking yes or no questions, I can assure you that your survey will be incredibly long if all you're asking is yes or no questions, unless you're just not really asking questions. That, I think, is the bigger thing. And to me, that's the bigger issue of this whole thing, is that I don't think that these people really want to ask questions. They do not, so they may ask, they may put a survey together that asks very few questions that basically are yes or no, that are meaningless. But that they can come back and go, well, we asked the people what they thought. Do they think this? Do they think it's a good idea? It's kind of like that little survey that the citizen in Sonoma Verde put out about the fire department, and it asked a question: do you support funding the fire department to ensure your fire safety, or something to that effect? It was one of those questions where if you said no, I don't support a fire department, I would prefer that my house burn down. You can do that kind of question, and that is a truly politically motivated question, but you're not going to get the kind of answers that this committee says that they're looking for. And the answer, and I will just be very frank about this, they're not looking for answers if they're going to do those kinds of surveys. So I promised you that we started with Mark Kipphut. We're going to end with Mark Kipphut. This is a montage from the meeting the other night where Mark Kipphut shares, he lives up to his new name, and that is going to be Captain Obvious of McClendon Chisholm. This is a montage of Captain Obvious's comments throughout the evening. And by the way, this is a short clip in comparison to all of the things that I could have included in this clip. So have fun watching this.
I think that this conversation highlights the broader issue of McClendon Chisholm. Just a few years ago, was a small town, small city. It's growing, county's growing significantly. Mm-hmm. I think, my opinion is it has been slow in the upstart, right, which development will occur. Land exists, and the land is owned, and the corridors are going to be developed in terms of throughput. I think we've been slow in formulating and not serving the city council well, not serving the city as well as it needs to. And part of that is just structure. It's a structural, in my mind, it's a structural question. So I sat down, wrote out some thoughts. These are my thoughts only. I didn't run them by anybody to get any feedback. I just sat down and thought, okay, so as we structure the panel, because I think that's one of our first, as we recreate this body.
After a year of work.
To do is structurally understand what we're doing, how we're set up and organized. With developing this set of slides, right? It was a great first step to get a vision down and some objectives, goals and objectives. Mm-hmm. So now how do you turn this into something more beneficial to the council so they ultimately make those decisions necessary? It doesn't really matter who's mayor, who's the council, right? This is about
I guess it's bigger than
giving back, specific guidance and thoughts. I watched
Captain Obvious.
I watched council struggle. I mean, they're struggling in that it's a non-paid position, right? There's no city staff is limited in size, phrases. But the problem is we're going to have a 6-lane road that's going to become a significant thoroughfare between 30 and 20 and arguably further north. and further south.
Right.
Right? And there are going to be a lot of traffic going up and down there. But it gets down to the
Profound.
shortfalls of, we have to set up the authorities associated with what we want. This, and I just call it a committee just for simplicity, right? An Economic Development Committee. Procedurally, how it will work, obligations, who our membership is. I mean, right now we have membership. Some of us have been, I think, approved by city council, approved by city council by vote. Others I don't think have. Where the lanes of
Screw the citizens in
what the
attendance.
lanes are, what our structure is, how much training. I think there's some training that needs to be done here, so we're, legally compliant and also technically proficient, as technically proficient as we can be. Structuring meetings and then, sort of attendance metrics.
Let's take
like
the
that, so we
committee
have
through
people-
training.
Because if we're going to put time and energy individually and as a group, I think we need to make sure everybody's all in,
Yeah.
committed in. So anyway,
Captain Obvious.
That's just all my thought on that. Because I'm going to attach the same thing as I think what Jim did was a really great first step.
Absolutely.
So just
I appreciate it. That's all right in.
read it.
Well, he's not done yet.
What do you want? What kind of businesses do you want? What kind of character? Where the city's going? I mean, we could be, completely off, right? You don't want to build this airplane while you're trying to fly it. I think you want to get it designed the best you can. before you
Profound.
take off. And obviously my concern is to make sure we get ahead of the 205 expansion, because once 205 occurs, it could be this, it's the stimulus that's going to open up a lot of interest in this part of, the southern part of the county. As we're setting up
Captain Obvious.
205 expansion. So let's just say hypothetically, business X comes into 205 I-50. And construction starts, right? Construction can have a very corrosive impact on businesses. And can actually drive them out of business. There's a digital transformation that's taking place in the United States right now. It's going to impact every industry that exists. It's already impacting, you see the Amazon effect just on groceries. So our natural tendency is to think about businesses relative to brick and mortar.
Profound.
You know where I'm going, how much brick and mortar is going to exist in 20 years. You would have, 30 years ago, if we were having a discussion about brewing beer, the notion of a microbrewery would have been laughed at. And along came Sam Adams, Samuel Adams, and along came the whole revolution.
Yeah.
So, I'm very careful about, saying what will be or what will not.
Sure. Yeah.
Captain Obvious.
Transformation and disruption are just inherent. Well, we have a lot of undeveloped land that's around.
Right.
On 550,
We have a lot of undeveloped land.
others.
Wow.
Big, large amounts of land that are just undeveloped, so they're owned. Somebody owns them, so what are they thinking, right? What do they want to do?
Tell us more, Captain
Such
Obvious.
annually, because it's a lot easier to develop that green space if they're committed to having green space. Understand what ground truth is today. So the next step would be understand what vision you want to build for the future, and then get to what changes need to be made, specific changes. He's going to add value, Jim's going to add value, Dan's going to add value, in their research and say, well, maybe we do it this way, and then we'll come back together and create the organization.
Captain Obvious, ladies and gentlemen. I think the obvious thing to do if we're going to really cultivate business development in our city is very simple. Understand that there is very little that the city of McLennan-Chisholm can do to prevent economic development from going on. And the reality is, those who do hold these major pieces of land hold all the cards. Business is coming in. The issue isn't how do we get business in, how do we attract them. The question is, how do you create obstacles for the kinds of businesses that we as a community don't want to see come in, that are going to diminish our quality of life. When I was mayor, one of the things, we brought in a winery. A couple came in and put a winery in. That's the kind of businesses that I was looking for, that I wanted to see, wanted to attract in our community. Something quaint, something homegrown, something unique. But they're not talking about that. Melody Osario is the only one on the committee the other night that talked about really working with the conservation groups to help preserve and protect our wide open spaces. That's really not the focus of this effort. The best thing that this committee can do is, first of all, stay ad hoc. Number two, the elected officials, the city council, should become more involved. They should actually take an interest in what's going on here. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But as far as I'm concerned, the best thing this city council can do is find a different way, find a different leader for this committee. Because Mark Kipphut is the one person. Mark Kipphut, Mike Donegan, these two guys should be nowhere near an economic development committee. They do not appreciate or value the values of our city. Mr. Kipphut is a Pennsylvania liberal who has ingratiated himself with the Republican Party here in Rockwall County. And as I've said so many times before, a Republican does not a conservative make. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Kipphut and Mrs. Kipphut, they opposed the tax rollback. Mr. Kipphut came before City Council just when they were going through the budget decisions, and he advocated for a 16.5-cent tax rate. The City Council instead raised this tax rate from an effective 12 cents to 15 cents. If Mr. Kipphut is put in charge of things, I guarantee you, government will grow, and so will your taxes. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you stay with us and that you subscribe to my channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you can be notified whenever I have a new show coming up. And until I see you next time, you have a great day. Hope it's a great weekend for you. I'm Bunker Bob, and we will see you next time.